When you look back on previous game consoles and the progression of the game industry as a whole, it's pretty easy to see why certain platforms were successful and why others failed. This all basically breaks down to some of the most successful consoles having a so-called killer app, also known as a system seller. These are games that usually fully utilize the power of said system to generate extreme hype and live on for years after release, both in terms of hours played by consumers as well as the memories and nostalgia that surround the big system sellers, and can sometimes last for decades. I think it's fairly safe to say that VR has not yet had its killer app, but more on that in a bit. Let's talk about a few examples to really get a grasp on what qualities one of these games has to be a system seller. First, I'll break down some consoles, all the way back to the Atari 2600, and it's an interesting example. The top-selling 2600 game by a large margin was Pac-Man. I can just imagine the gigantic excitement of having an arcade exclusive like Pac-Man in your home to play an unlimited amount of time and no quarters required. But it actually ended up being criticized as one of the worst video games of all time. However, it did sell consoles and certainly sold cartridges, which is interesting to our point here, so let's fast forward a few years. The NES with Super Mario Bros. Outselling the second-rated game Duck Hunt by almost 40%. If you had an NES, you likely also had Super Mario Bros. And if you didn't have either, you wanted an NES to play Mario. Following the crash of the entire gaming industry, Super Mario Bros. Is one of the best examples that we have. It was a game that was so phenomenal that it literally pulled an entire industry by its bootstraps and got everyone excited about gaming again. Okay, this time I'm going to fast forward all the way to the Xbox. Now I think we all know the game I'm going to be talking about whenever I mention the original Xbox. Of course, it's Halo. You bought an Xbox to play Halo. In fact, Halo Combat Evolved and Halo 2 outsold the next 8 best-selling Xbox titles combined. Now, I'm especially nostalgic about Halo because I grew up in the era of Halo, and the franchise still has lasting effects to this day, even though the past few years haven't been exactly so kind to the name. In fact, the only reason why I ever owned an Xbox or a 360 or an Xbox One was specifically to play this game franchise. If we're talking about very recent occurrences in gaming, we could look at the gigantic spike in PC gaming, and that's kind of attributed to being the true scene of competitive esports at this time. Titles like Overwatch, League of Legends, Fortnite, and actually the whole Battle Royale genre as a whole being incredibly popular. Yeah, I know Overwatch, Fortnite, Apex Legends, PUBG are all multi-platform games, but if you're taking the game seriously and the competitive scene seriously, it's on PC. Even things like World of Warcraft are good examples of system sellers, even though it feels weird referring to the PC platform as a game system. There are tons of examples of system sellers, and don't be upset if your favorite one wasn't mentioned, because all in all, this is a VR video, and I'm just giving a few short examples. But now, how does this relate to VR? Because the number one thing that virtual reality needs at this point is a true system seller. Don't get me wrong, I've played every single big and highly rated VR game out there, and there are some absolutely amazing games. Just off the top of my head, I'm thinking Lone Echo, Journey of the Gods, Gorn, Beat Saber, Pavlov, Onward, Space Junkies. I mean, I could go on all day with games that I enjoy and think are great in VR. But if I were to mention any of these games, with maybe an exception to Beat Saber, to the general public, they would have no idea what I'm talking about. Actually, if I mentioned any of these games to someone that's really into flat screen gaming, they'd probably still be lost. We're kind of in a bubble as VR enthusiasts. And what VR really needs is a big, innovative killer app that people see and say, oh my god, whatever it takes, however much money I need to spend on this VR thing, I just need to play that game. And so far, it feels like the VR industry has been living off the momentum of being, well, a virtual reality. I know that I wanted in about 4 years ago, not because of what I saw at the time, but because of the potential of what I saw in VR. And while the experiences that I have had have absolutely hooked me for life, just the potential or idea of VR might not be enough to capture this gigantic potential audience. So let's look at what made these games so successful for their console. A few common occurrences in killer apps. You have to break ground. For the Atari 2600, that was bringing a previously arcade-only game to the home. For Halo, it was a world developed with quality console multiplayer. What VR has to do is be groundbreaking. Well, it's already virtual reality, which is groundbreaking in itself, but it's what is done in the world that decides the killer app potential. You have to be easy to access. No matter how good it is, you can't have a console launch for $2,500 with an amazing game and expect mass adoption. Fortunately, we have devices like the Oculus Quest that drive costs far lower, but the amount of people that have VR-ready PCs shouldn't be underestimated either. Millions of people have PCs that can run VR just fine, and at least on Oculus' side, the buy-in cost for a standalone VR setup and a PC VR headset is essentially the exact same as long as you have a minimum spec VR-ready PC. Culture defining. So this one isn't done overnight by any means, but VR needs something like Mario, Sonic, or Master Chief. All of those are mascots that have defined culture around an era of gaming. And finally, the viral factor. Does the product reach people that don't even know what VR stands for? Does it become a household name? The closest VR title that has reached these limited and definitely not conclusive conditions is Beat Saber. The trailers went viral on Facebook around 2016, and it's easy to access, it breaks ground in its own way, not to mention it's the top-selling VR game at the time, but it's still not quite there. Almost, but you have to admit, there is far more that can be done in VR than milsims or a rhythm game. People think it looks awesome and would jump at an opportunity to play Beat Saber, but it's something they could live without experiencing. And maybe we just haven't seen what our platform is capable of yet. When I first joined into VR, there was nearly nothing regarding engaging content, only potential. And that was really enough for me, and if you're watching this, that probably is or was enough for you to jump into VR. We have some pretty damn amazing games to spend our time in, and those games have all become part of a library of VR software that I'm honestly proud of, but I'm still waiting and looking for that true killer app. The killer app may just be Boneworks, or Stormland, Asgard's Wrath, or a game that we haven't even heard of yet. I've already made it clear on this channel that I'm extremely hopeful for all three of these titles, as well as a few others, and I've seen channels like Node show off Boneworks to people that may be interested in VR entirely off the hype of this game. I think we can all do our part by supporting projects that we deem to have potential to be a system seller, but for now, we're kind of faced with a chicken and egg scenario regarding that big game. Does VR have to become a multi-billion-dollar industry to create a killer app? Or is a killer app all it takes to turn VR into a multi-billion-dollar industry? We honestly won't know until one of the two happens, and all I can say is keep your eyes out for the big budget developers, constantly be developing indie dev projects, and support the ones that you love on both sides in every way possible. You never know when that $20 you gave for an early access VR title in the future may just be the game that truly kicks VR off and provides that killer app that we've all been looking for. Don't forget to subscribe and like this video if you liked it. If you disagree or have any input, please comment and let me know. Let's have a discussion. That's what this channel is really all about. And if you want to further that discussion, join up in my Discord and we could really go at it. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and I really hope you enjoyed. If you do want to keep hearing some of this voice, I have a podcast with Eric for President, and we talk about VR stuff and have some pretty funny discussions. It's called The V-Bar, and it's on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Stitcher. Come check us out. Well, thanks again. Thrill signing off.